Hello and welcome. I am sitting here with my wife, your therapist. Today we are talking about violence in relationships, intimate partner violence, or really just abuse between two people who are in a relationship, what you can do about it, how to spot it, what some of the identifiers are. So this is going to be kind of a challenging topic, but you may not know this. Your therapist actually worked as a sexual assault victim advocate for a few years, and knows quite a lot about this topic. So with that said, my name is Price, and I married your therapist.
Hi, I'm Ash, and I'm your therapist. Please keep in mind that even though this is a podcast about mental health and therapy, it's not the same thing as or a replacement for therapy.
So Ashlyn, give me the breakdown. Why have we decided to talk about dating violence today?
Well, like you said, I worked as a sexual assault victim advocate, and part of our organization.
I'm sorry to interrupt. For those who don't know, because I realize that that's, like, I know what that means.
Yeah.
But what does a sexual assault victim advocate do?
Yeah, a lot of people don't know it exists unless they've honestly had to work with one.
Right.
But it's somebody who provides support and resources and gets people connected to help when they've experienced sexual assault or somebody that they love has. And this organization was 3 parts. So we dealt with sexual assault, child abuse, and also domestic violence. So I spent a lot of time kind of in that world, learning about it, getting a lot of education and working very closely. Not to mention, there's a lot of overlap between domestic violence and sexual assault because a lot of assault occurs within relationships, and within, with acquaintances and that sort of thing. And so all of that combined means that there's a lot of overlap.
You having that job helped me gain a great deal of perspective on life, because a tough day at the office for you was very different than a tough day at the office for me.
Yeah, it was different. It was a job that I loved, though. I felt it was an amazing role to have, and I loved working on a team. You were really helping
people in their darkest moments, when they needed the help the most.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great role to get to be in, and honestly really propelled me forward as a therapist because I wanted to get to do more of that same sort of work kind of at the next level. So
what brings us to talking about this topic today of all days?
So in particular, I want to talk about this because both in that role and now as a therapist, this is really common. It's something that so many people experience during their lives. In fact, a third, research is always really bad at including like non-binary and gender non-conforming people, but more than a third of women will experience this.
Abuse.
Yeah, will experience, domestic violence is what that statistic is about. And it touches everybody. Women 18 to 34 are most at risk. So it's this really like young, vulnerable demographic. And people often tend to experience that violence from the same person again and again because these relationships are really, really hard to get out of. And so the best thing to do is to be able to spot the signs early about what's going on, so that you don't end up down the road in a place that's just really hard and dangerous to leave, honestly.
So we're going to be talking about how to identify if somebody is going to be abusive through some early warning signs.
Yes.
Yeah, that'll be a part of our conversation today.
Yep.
So I feel like this question really needs to be asked up front to kind of set the stage. What does dating violence or, abuse from your partner entail exactly? Like, what are we talking specifically about, like domestic abuse and battery, like the traditional idea of like a man beating his wife, or are we going deeper than that?
Well, intimate partner violence covers 3 things. It does cover physical abuse. It also covers sexual assault as well as stalking. A lot of people don't know that not only is stalking like a horrible thing to deal with and a very real thing. It's not a silly thing as it's sometimes portrayed or just an annoying thing. It's also a crime. It's also something that it can be hard to track and to collect evidence that that's what's going on, but it's something that's absolutely illegal to do, and it's something that happens pretty commonly, especially from somebody who is or was an intimate partner.
So following your partner around, maybe to their workplace, and like, is that what stalking is, or is there like digital stalking as well, like where we're doing it online?
Yes, that's a great question. Digital stalking as well. So that can be anything from like stalking somebody online and like learning information about them, but mostly that entails continuing to text and pester and reach out and communicate when they've asked you not to do that.
So what sorts of situations would you see somebody stalking a partner? What does that look like exactly? Like, why would I be doing that?
Well, stalking, all of abuse comes back down to power and control. And so if somebody in a relationship is stalking their partner, they're probably accusing them of like cheating and concerned about their whereabouts all of the time. And they're following them or calling their workplace or showing up to their workplace, calling or showing up to where they are with friends.
I've seen that happen. I've had a coworker who had a boyfriend drop in on her all the time, call the office all the time to make sure that he knew where she was.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Driving by, stopping in, all of those things.
Yeah.
And then after a relationship, sometimes somebody will feel like they're still entitled to that, or that they're somehow going to win the person back by continuing to show up. But again, it's a control thing that they've lost control by no longer being in the relationship, and they're trying to regain it. And often I think that we discredit people who perpetrate these sorts of things. They know that it's scary. It's scary to have somebody show up out of the blue. I think we play it as like a romantic gesture sometimes, that somebody shows up and calls and checks in and does all of those things. And certainly there's an extent to which that's okay, but it's terrifying to never know when somebody's going to suddenly be there. And, you know, these people are doing it for nefarious purposes.
So if you're at work, Ashlyn, and I show up unannounced, are you communicating that scares you, that terrifies you?
Well, I'm seeing clients, so don't show up to my work unannounced. But no, we know one another and have an agreement that sort of thing would be okay, that those sorts of surprises are like welcome and okay in a relationship. It's really when it started to get in the way of work, or it's something that makes the other person uncomfortable and they're saying like, hey, you're not allowed to come to my workplace, and that person is continuing to show up and do that.
I envision a situation where maybe I do show up to your workplace a few times and you love it. It's great, but then it keeps happening.
Yeah.
And I'm doing it a little bit more frequently, and then maybe you suggest that's making you uncomfortable, and then I do this like dramatic, how could you say that? I'm just trying to show you love. And then I guilt trip you into like accepting it. And then it happens a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I'm now visiting you all the time. And I'm like manipulating you into thinking that that's what you want in the first place.
Yeah.
And that feels like the sort of path that we go down when we're seeing the situation play out, right?
It's probably also leading into manipulation around, well, why are you doing something that I shouldn't see?
Oh, right.
That now the person who's saying that they're uncomfortable with it is suddenly the person in the wrong, because we often do that switching in a abusive relationship.
What do you mean by that?
Where the person who's abusive flips the tables. So every time somebody's bringing up their discomfort or that something happened, instead of ever actually having that conversation, it's flipped. So in that case of stalking, the person says, hey, it's not okay for you to show up at my work. It's making me uncomfortable. I'm not able to get my job done. Well, what are you doing that makes it so that you don't want me to see you?
As I get older and, dare I say, a little wiser, I'm realizing that when people make accusations in anger, that idea of like a strong defense is a good offense. Like before you can even come for me, I'm coming for you. Well, why wouldn't you want me to see what you're doing? A lot of the times those accusations are self-reporting. I'm telling you something I'm worried that you'll find out about me too. And I'm not saying that's always the case in these situations, but it often is, right? Where I'm blaming you that you have something to hide because I have something to hide.
Yeah, and now I've said it first, so you're not allowed to come back and say it to me. Now you know you can't. No, you're the one who now you're flipping it, and now they're going to accuse you of literally exactly the thing that they're doing. Yeah, it's very much a manipulative tactic, and they then get to control that conversation and which direction it heads. If you try to get back into the original thing, now you're the one who's distracting. You're the one who's defensive.
I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, because we're going to frame all of these interactions as between a man and a woman for the most part. Mm-hmm. That's not saying that women can't be abusive to men, and that's not saying that every single person on the planet identifies as a man or a woman. But in large part, when we're talking about these domestic situations, it is between a man is perpetrating the violence against a woman.
Yeah, so regularly it's a man who's perpetuating the violence. Not to mention, yes, those things are true. Absolutely. Unfortunately, a lot of the research has only focused on men and women in relationships, but definitely this can occur in queer relationships.
Of course.
This can occur in where the woman's the one perpetuating violence. Absolutely. I've talked with many men who've been the victim. And there's something that's especially difficult in that situation because often nobody believes them, or people think it's a joke, that people then make fun of their masculinity, which is more abuse. So yeah, I think that we'll probably end up defaulting to referencing that. That does describe a lot of situations. Yeah. But yes, certainly.
I just wanted to take a minute and level set, because I realized what we were doing already is like breaching these ideas within this set context, and that doesn't really capture everybody. Yeah. You know, but one thing that's difficult for men is that they may even be hesitant to call it abuse themselves because they don't want to be abused. They don't want to be seen as someone who is abused, particularly because it calls them to question their masculinity in the first place.
Yeah, it feels embarrassing to share. They worry about not being believed, and often they aren't. I had so many men call in on our hotline and say, "You're the first domestic violence center that has believed me." It wasn't just, "You're the first person to." I have called other centers and they won't help me. Mm-hmm.
Jeez.
Yeah, no, it's a horrible issue. And so, yeah, that education is really important to get out there.
So what are some ways that we might be able to identify red flags in a relationship, especially early on? Because I don't think that a lot of relationships we start with straight up abuse where it's super easy to identify on a first date or something like that, right? But we're able to maybe identify some red flags early on that would clue us into the types of abuse that might spring up in a relationship with somebody. What advice can you give us on that front?
Absolutely. I want to talk about red flags and why some of these things will be really confusing when you're seeing those things happen. Okay. Why they might feel like maybe this is an abuse or maybe this is normal. So some red flags are checking, or that the partner is checking your phone, your email, or your other social media accounts without your permission. I know sometimes partners will have agreements about having access to each other's phones. That's one thing, but this person is getting into your stuff without your permission. That's not allowed. Like, we're two individuals in a relationship. And those things very easily turn into a means of control, that they can post things from your account, that they know private information about you, that they're able to access other important documents, that sort of thing.
They're not looking in good faith, right? You're not being made aware. This isn't like a, hey, we check up on each other's stuff because we're both paranoid and don't trust each other. Like, that can be one thing, but this is somebody who is like exerting control.
Also, if you're in a relationship where you perpetually don't trust one another, regardless of whether or not it's an abusive relationship, probably not a healthy one. It's certainly not a healthy sign if we're incessantly needing to look into each other's things. Frequently putting you down, especially in front of other people. Even if it's in...
I'm sorry, I'm just sitting here cracking up because I'm like, I've had access to your phone the entire time we've been together, and it's just so goddamn boring. I don't get on there because it's just, there's nothing on your phone I'm interested in.
Yeah. No, we have full access, and it always, I think early on felt like, oh, this is like, we have access and maybe we should be looking, and I never ever pick up I just don't care.
Yeah.
Not to mention you have a flip phone, so that makes things excessively more boring.
Don't tell them about my flip phone.
I want to talk about your flip phone in a future episode. Well, I'm going to tease that a little bit. Okay, they're isolating you from friends or family. This can be physically isolating you from them, not allowing you to go be in touch with them. Financially isolating you from them. That's probably more in a relationship or a long-term relationship. Sorry, a marriage or a long-term relationship. Or emotionally isolating you from them. That can either be they're not allowing you to have communication with them, or they might be starting to put down your family all of the time, or put you down to your family, or do something where you no longer are able to maintain good relationships with them.
I can approach this conversation from a different perspective than you because I have been abusive. And I have perpetuated abuse in previous relationships, especially where I had, other than you, I had one serious dating relationship with like one other person. And I was abusive. And I wasn't physically abusive, but I was definitely emotionally abusive. And I recognize that now, and years ago apologized for it. And that felt very cathartic to be able to clear the air there. But I did that. I tried to isolate her from her friends. Yeah. And I didn't even do it like consciously.
I was going to say, were you consciously aware of doing that?
No, but I recognized what the pattern of what was happening. And it's because I had been hurt through a rift that happened in my family. And I was very afraid of losing people. Yeah. That people would abandon. I was afraid of abandonment. Yep. And so I thought the best way to make sure that couldn't happen was to be the only person in her life that could be anything of value to her. Yep. And when I saw her spend time with her family or with her friends, that made me afraid that I wasn't that's competition. Yeah, it was competition. I viewed it as competition. Not consciously, I recognize it for what it is now, many years later. I'm not trying to justify abuse. I'm just trying to say that, like, I can recognize where a lot of that comes from, and it comes from fear, right? It comes from fear and probably previous trauma, and it is despicable, that sort of behavior, because it is all about just controlling somebody, and the joy that you get out of that relationship is solely the joy you get from exerting control over someone, which is not real joy. That's tainted joy and happiness. So the entire time you're perpetuating that, you're just digging yourself into a more miserable hole as the abuser as well. Yeah. Nobody's having a good time.
Yeah, because everybody continues to be a threat. Instead of facing that, like choosing to trust your partner, they go spend time with friends. You sit with the discomfort of, I've been abandoned in relationships or in my family before. And then they come back and you enjoy time together. And then they continue to spend time with friends and you continue to sit with that discomfort and they continue to come back to you. And then you start to build up that trust and you go, oh, this isn't going to happen again. But if you never if you never are able to sit with that discomfort and instead you're exerting control in the relationship, it never gets to go away. When I was going to talk about like the whole spectrum of kind of healthy relationships versus unhealthy relationships. And in that, so many of those things are things that all of us have done, that we did in our first relationships because we didn't know better, that we did because of fear, from fear and insecurity, and that they're really common things to do. And then it's important to look at where we have been controlling in relationships.
It's a path that leads to death.
Why do you say that? Because
the ultimate control over somebody is being able to take their life, right? And when abusive situations are unmitigated, that's where it leads eventually, a lot of the time, right? Especially if it's a abusive relationship and then physical abuse becomes a part of that, and then that goes unchecked. Yeah. And it's getting worse and worse. That's what I mean. That leads to somebody dying.
Yeah, well, I think that we can all be capable of committing like abuse in relationships. I don't think we're all on the path to like killing our partners.
No, of course.
But yes, absolutely. Domestic violence relationships get worse and worse and worse, and often do end in serious injury or death. Because you're right, that is the ultimate form of control.
Yeah. If neither party is able to get help, or to overcome that,
Yeah.
you know, and to find any sort of peace or healing. That's what I mean. It's not something that gets better on its
Yeah.
own. That's
Yeah.
really what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it just spirals down to worse and worse and worse.
Okay, I'm sorry I didn't get off track a little
You're
bit.
good.
So the isolating people, the constantly checking up on them, you know, invading their privacy.
Extreme jealousy is another one.
Yeah.
Explosive outbursts, temper, mood swings. Oftentimes the other person is being blamed for that. Any form of physical harm, that's always inappropriate. And then possessiveness and controlling behavior. And it's funny because we sometimes idolize somebody being kind of possessive. I think a lot of times culturally we view it as kind of sexy for somebody to be like, nobody else gets access to my woman. And the thing is that that's a form of control. That's, again, kind of the thing that you were describing with friendships. And it's something that can spiral out of control.
And that starts with a lot of very weird and overbearing father-daughter relationships.
That's true. That's a whole different topic, but yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, a lot of, I mean...
I'm going to be sitting on my porch with a shotgun when the boys come up from my little girl. The narrative, that like
There's
controlling narrative
ownership.
starts there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we so objectify women, and that's a continuation of that cycle, or that's like the birthplace for a lot of people of that cycle, is that like dad owns their daughter in a way.
Yeah. If you're a dad, you're listening to this, and you're like, oh, I would do anything to fucking defend my daughter. Like that's cool. Like it's honorable to want to like defend your family, protect your family. But when we started getting into like okay, you're more able to articulate defensiveness of your daughter over your son. That inequality is what I'm talking about, right?
Right. That there's something different when it comes to your daughter.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And here are some reasons that those things can feel really confusing. So here are some more common signs, but why that might be really tricky to notice when this is abuse. So one thing is not taking no for an answer. The reason that I think that this is really tricky is that we see that in like movies all the time. Like somebody asks somebody out and they say no, and now the hero's quest of this whole movie is convincing her to say yes. And that's something that we perpetuate again and again and again, that there's something good in that pursuit when that continues with other harmful habits. So in a relationship, when you're not able to say no to things, you're guilted into not saying no to things. And usually that's the other thing, is that it's insidious. It can happen kind of below the surface. You might not realize that you're not just able to say no to something, but there's pouting afterwards, or there's whining about it, or it's making you saying no so miserable that you stop doing it. Never disagreeing with you. That's part of something called love bombing. So maybe you're the one who's never allowed to disagree, but there might be a period of time early on where they never disagree with you. And that's confusing and harmful because you're two separate people. You should disagree on things. If your partner right off the bat never ever says anything disagreeing with you, probably it's part of love bombing, which is showering them with so much like perfection and affection that you can't say no to things, and you find yourself in this relationship.
And that's often the preamble to pulling the rug out from under you.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm going to show you all this affection, and then suddenly I'm going to turn off the faucet and leave you high and dry and reeling because I'm a master manipulator and I'm in total control of your emotions.
And I'm almost definitely going to blame you for why that happened.
Yeah.
No, I'm the good guy. You know how I am. You know how I want to be to you.
Yeah.
You made me do this.
Yeah.
You made me pull the rug on this. Part of that also can be excessive gift giving, especially early on or after an argument. That they act differently around you than they do other people. If you're constantly having to tell other people, no, he's really sweet in private, he's probably not that sweet. Or they're amazing with other people. They're so suave and so charming and everybody loves them, but you see a whole different side of them. That's proof that they know better, but they're choosing to treat you like that.
Yeah. They're smart enough to not treat you like shit in public.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Somebody who's super fast to commit, that can be an issue as well. That's kind of also part of that love bombing, never disagreeing sort of thing. Why? We don't know each other. Somebody who's immediately, let's move in together. Let's do this thing. Let's be on to this next step. You're going to find yourself suddenly in a place you never expected to be. And then the last one was moving away from your family.
Separating you from your support system.
Yep, separating
furthering
you
that
from
isolating
your support
concept.
system.
I think that a lot of us experience these things, perpetuate these things, and certainly see other people in these kinds of relationships. Mm-hmm. What can we do if somebody that we care about appears to be in an abusive relationship?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think so many people experience this that if it's not you experiencing it, you've probably been around somebody who is. It can be hard to talk about, and people can get really defensive of these things. They're probably taught to be pretty defensive of those things within that relationship. So when the conversation does come up, knowing how to ask good questions can be important. Really getting down to how the relationship makes that person feel. Being a good friend to them. Something that happens in these relationships, like we've talked about, is that people lose their friends. So know that if your friend is in an abusive relationship, they're probably not going to show up as a great friend to you. That they're probably going to be an inconsistent friend. They're probably
not allowed to be.
Right. They're being kept from their friends. They're only rewarded in that relationship when they're only ever present for it. But know that it's also really dangerous when you start losing your friends. That's exactly what the intention is. So continuing to check in on that person and be available to them is a big part of being that support system. While also having your own. If that's your only close friend, that's a big deal. It's going to feel like losing that friend. So make sure that you're surrounded by other people as well. Understand the stages of change. That's something that we talk about as therapists, but basically the idea is it takes somebody a long time to change. That it first starts with recognition that something's going on, then with like an intention to make a change, then with starting to take the steps to make a change, and usually having to try and fail at that process of making a change. And what I mean by that is these relationships are hard to leave. You might see that person take a really, really long time to think through, maybe this isn't good. Maybe I should leave. Maybe that's something I'll do down the road. Okay, I'm going to try to break up. Oh, we didn't break up. He was actually really sweet. And that's a normal part of it.
To me, it feels like a semi going down the highway. Like, it took a while for that semi to get up to that speed. And it's going to take a long time for that semi to get to a full stop, right?
Yes.
That person, that abused person was brought into this position of, like, visibly clear abuse over a long period of time.
Yes.
And through manipulation. And a part of the narrative is that they're wrong, they're crazy, they're out of order. And it's going to take a long time to deprogram from that sort of narrative, right?
Yeah, that's a great way to put that. Honoring their autonomy, because they're not going to have autonomy in their relationship. Making sure that they're not experiencing more of that outside of the relationship. Considering their safety. It's really dangerous to leave an abusive relationship a lot of the time, and that is where a lot of harm can occur. And so getting them in connection with professionals, with domestic violence resource centers and that sort of thing. And then taking care of yourself, self-care. It's really, really hard to watch a friend go through this, so it's going to be important for you to have your own resources for support. But yeah, every county is required to have a domestic violence shelter or resource, or to have that combined with another county. So know that you can go online and find something near to you, and they're going to know everything about how difficult this process is. They have a lot of safety mechanisms built into things like their website, where you can automatically get off the page and clear your history, so that they understand the difficulty and the severity of these situations, and they're amazing at providing those sorts of resources. They know about the financial trickiness of leaving, so those things are a big deal.
With just a little bit of time left, because we're doing a shorter episode today.
Yay!
What kind of encouragement could you give to somebody who might be in an abusive relationship, and maybe they have a suspicion, they have an inkling that maybe everything's not what it should be, you know?
Yeah.
How do you... What sort of thoughts could you share with that person?
A couple of things. You're not wrong for having a hard time figuring this out. Like we talked about, it's something that happens really slowly over time, and there's so much manipulation involved. and it is very intentional, whether or not it's even conscious, like we were talking about before, but it's very intentional the way you're slowly isolated from other people. And these happen to everybody. It really doesn't discriminate when it comes to abusive relationships. Anybody can be in one. And so know that it's not your fault. It's not your fault for being confused about this. That's very intentional. And also that you can trust your gut. I think people will start to have those inklings, and that's really important. And know that people in really happy, healthy relationships don't have to sit around and question if that might be what's happening.
Right. Yeah, if you have to ask, right?
Right. Yeah, if you're asking the question, there's something there, right? That if something feels weird, if something like gives you the ick in the relationship, that's a good thing to pay attention to. You can trust your gut, and then make sure to continue reaching out to your support system that you might notice that you're feeling isolated from them, and they're really, really important to have.
Well, Ashlyn, thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me about this. It's something you know a lot about, you care a lot about, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was great. It's a topic that's really important and impacts so many people. I think everybody should be empowered with this knowledge and be able to recognize these signs early.
Where can we find more information about these topics or other topics, or get in touch with you directly if we wanted to reach out?
Absolutely. My website is ashtreecounselingcenter.com, where you can find resources and blog posts and that sort of thing. And then you can find me on social media at therapywith_Ash. And you can find the podcast at I Married Your Therapist.
Yeah, I've been editing reels for Instagram and TikTok.
Yeah.
I've got a new haircut. So listeners, if you'd like to come on and bully my haircut,
check out the haircut.
It's a little brave, bold, and beautiful. So come leave a nasty comment about that. That would kind of make my day. That would be great. Okay, well, Ashlyn, thank you so much for your time.
Price, thank you for your time.
And we'll see you next time on I Married Your Therapist.